Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is TravisShaddox. Let's start over. Here we look to find how we know what we know about turfgrass science. And I'd like to know how I don't know anything about microphones and video. I should have went to school to figure out some of this stuff instead of doing whatever I did. So, but anyway, this is Turfgrass Epistemology. We've been going over fertilizers, and we're going to be going over that tonight and for the next couple of episodes. And we will blend that into soil testing probably in a month. I don't really know when we're going to get to that, but it'll be after fertilizers. We're going to be doing fertilizers for today and then Monday morning and next Thursday night, and that might be about it. So look forward to that. Okay, the last couple episodes have been about fertilizer. The last episode was with Dr. Munshaw. I want to thank him for his time. And we went over blue muta, which he's one of the only people who really does any research with blue muta. He was sort of involved in the last 10 or 15 years with its sort of rebirth, if you want to call it that. And if you're interested in having a system with Bermuda and bluegrass together to kind of produce a more uniform green and more uniform performing turfgrass for areas like sport turf, then you can go back and listen to that episode. It's on YouTube as well as the podcasts. Please don't forget, for those people who may be interested in listening while you're driving or listening while you're working and don't have to have YouTube on all the time, these are also available on all the podcast platforms, but it's usually not available until around 12 to 14 hours after the episode ends. So this episode will be available around tomorrow, around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I want to thank the members. I always want to thank the members. They contribute real money to support the channel and to support turfgrass research. We have a couple new members here tonight, I think, if I'm not mistaken. We have Lon B joined tonight. There was 2 other ones that joined tonight as well. I've already passed that chat, but thank you. For those of you who are new, the membership funds go to keep the channel on the air and pay for certain things and equipment and things like that. But any resources that are remaining after that, then it goes into turfgrass research. So I do some little things on the side, and that helps support those expenses. You also get a little bit of background stuff as a membership. You get a free Calendly meeting with me if you want to do that and have one-on-one consultation. You get that for free. The information you get behind the scenes is sort of like just personal information, usually about me. If you're not interested in that, don't worry about it. But if you're interested in a little bit more about what I do and goofing around stuff at the house, sometimes I'll post stuff on the community tab for the members only to kind of check out. So that's a little bit about what you get from memberships. And like I said, next Thursday is the summer solstice, and we will be on next Thursday. So the longest day of the year. And I guess that's the only time we'll be on for the next 7 years, actually on the solstice. So that'll be an interesting night, I hope. It'll be some more fertilizer stuff. Okay, so I want to do something real quick with my microphone, because I think there's probably going to be... It's probably going to sound a little bit different because I had the other microphone fine-tuned. And so I apologize if I blow everybody's eardrums out tonight. I'm going to do my best to do a quick little adjustment on that so I don't blow everybody's eardrums out. And then I'll get back, hopefully figure it out and fix it before next week. I don't know what happened. Okay, so last Thursday night, we went over some fertilizer raw materials, and I went over and explained how fertilizer raw material analysis actually become 4600, or not become, or 4600, or ammonium sulfate is 2100, 21% nitrogen, or concentrated superphosphate is 46% phosphorus, and so forth. Okay, I went over and explained that. If you missed that episode, it's okay. I'll do my best to kind of walk through that information a little bit on this episode as well. But please go back and listen to that episode if you get a little lost during this one. There's going to be a little bit of an assumption that you know certain information in today's discussion, such as I'm going to assume you know a little bit about the percentages and what NP and K actually are and how to find that information on a tag. When we get into formulation, there's some questions at the end, some exercises at the end of tonight's episode where I'll just put a question on the screen, and then I'm going to allow you all to, if you want to, answer the question in chat. I'm not actually going to answer it. I'm going to let you all answer it and type it in chat or however you want to do it to give you a time to figure it out. And for those listening on podcasts, I'll do my best to explain what's on the screen so when you're listening, you're not completely blind. But when you're doing those exercises at the end, there's going to be an assumption. You're going to have to know something from the beginning, and that is you're going to need to know the percentage of nitrogen, P2O5, and K2O that's actually in a raw material. So if you are on a computer or on your laptop or whatever, you're probably going to need a calculator at the end, not for another 30 or 40 minutes, but a calculator at the end, and you're probably going to need to have access to Google. And if you don't know the analysis off the top of your head, like if you know what the analysis of muriate of potash is off the top of your head, then don't worry about it. But if you don't know that's a 0060, then you'll need to Google, percent potassium and muriate of potash so you can actually do the exercise. Okay? Okay. And there's only 20 or 30 slides here. If I get through it in 20 or 30 minutes and I have time at the end, then I'll do some comments and emails. But if I don't, then I'll try to fit that into one of the future episodes when there's a little bit more time. Because some of the comments and emails are they're just funny. They're just hilarious. So I wanted to get to them at some point. And I'll do my best to answer any questions you have in chat. And I'm going to answer them as I try to do always, answer them in order of members first. Well, first of all, let's back up. My wife first. I'll answer any of her questions first, and she's in chat. Then I'll answer any members, and then I'll answer any subscribers. I'll try to go in that order, okay? My wife's always number one. Sorry. I've been in academia now I'm retired from academia. I'm not in any position at all. I do some consulting on the side and just daddle around with some research. But I was in academia for 5 or 6 years, and before that I was in the turfgrass industry in Florida for about 10 years or so. And much of that was spent in fertilizer sales and marketing and things like that, primarily for golf, but also for lawn care and sod production. So I wanted to kind of bring a little bit about that information, a little bit of the background information that might be interesting or useful to you all from the purchasing perspective, and about how the ordering process occurs on the distributor's end, and what information might be useful to you to help produce either the same product for less money or a better product for the same or less money. In other words, trying to result in a more efficient turfgrass business for you. And that's what some of this information is going to be for you all tonight. There are manufacturers like Koch, Yar, and Potash Corp that actually manufacture raw materials and create raw materials or mine raw materials and then ship them on barges into the United States or wherever, South America or Europe or wherever. And they ship them in usually on large barges, and then they rail them or truck them into blenders facilities to blend the raw materials. Okay, but raw materials are things like urea, ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, sulfur. So I mean, all sorts of raw materials that can be manufactured, created, or mined out of the earth, and then they're shipped in. Okay. The manufacturer creates it, but then the material needs to be blended in order before it gets to you. And these blenders are the formulators, and they blend the raw materials to create a finished product. So the finished product is what you're used to buying. You buy a bag of fertilizer, right? 10, 10, 10, or whatever you're buying. That's a finished fertilizer, and it's been formulated using raw materials. That's from a blender. And these are people like ATS or CPS or Harrell's or Simplot or Howard's or Site One or any of these other companies that you probably buy directly from. Those are blenders. Okay, they've taken raw materials, and they've taken the materials and blended them in a certain percentage and created a new finished fertilizer, and that's what you bought. The distributor is also oftentimes the blender. So you bought it from the distributor. The blender blends it, but the blender and distributor are almost always the same person. Occasionally you'll have a distributor, especially on YouTube. You have a lot of people who are distributing products. They have nothing. They're just buying it sideways and then selling it again. They're not blending anything. They'll buy it, or they'll contract a certain tonnage from a company who's blending it, and then they'll ship it into their warehouse, and then they'll just sell it as a distributor. But many times, if you're buying, especially if you're buying large tonnages, you're buying truckload quantities, usually the distributor and the blender are the same one. Like, for example, Harold's is a blender and a distributor of fertilizers. I believe Howard's is the same way. I believe ATS is the same way. Okay, so blenders blend it, distributors distribute the product. Okay, and then there's a superintendent or the end user or turf manager or lawn care operator that applies the raw materials to finished fertilizer. That'd be you. Okay. Manufacturers, essentially all nitrogen used in fertilizers is manufactured from air as ammonia. Now I'm going to talk about a process that was, it's called the haber-bosch process. I'm going to show a ridiculously broken down, simplified version of the haber-bosch process. But that process essentially harvests nitrogen out of the air and converts it into a form that we can use as a liquid first, or gas first, and a liquid, and then we further process it down into a dry granule. But that process was created by a German named Fritz Haber, who was also responsible for the death of millions and millions of people in World War I and even World War II, because he mastered the chlorine element at a time when no one else really did, and that chlorine element was used in Zyklon A, which was a pesticide. But when World War I broke out, when World War II broke out, the Nazis converted Zyklon A to Zyklon B, and that's the gas that was used in the gas chambers towards the end of World War II. And so Fritz Haber has a horrible story. There's a book written by his grandson called Gas Cloud. And it's a horrible story where his wife committed suicide. His son was murdered, or I can't remember his murder. He also committed suicide. It was just an awful mess because he was essentially outcast and shunned because of all the deaths that he was responsible for. However, the reason I'm saying all that is because Fritz Haber, yes, he was responsible for the deaths of millions and millions of people through the gas warfare in World War I and then the Zyklon B in World War II. But he also discovered how to harvest nitrogen out of the air, which that process is essentially responsible for all nitrogen fertilizer that we use. And that process is estimated to be responsible for approximately half, let me back up. The haber-bosch process is responsible for approximately half of the dietary needs of half of the human population on Earth. So the dietary needs of about 3.5 billion people is being met by the increased food production resulting from nitrogen being applied via the haber-bosch process. In other words, if we didn't have the haber-bosch process, the world would have about approximately 3 billion, 4 billion people in it, rather than 7 or 8 billion people, or half the population would be starving to death. So it is a weird sort of, conundrum or juxtaposition where you have a man who was responsible for millions of deaths also be responsible for billions of lives. But that's the haber-bosch process by Fritz Haber anyway. I'm sorry, I kind of digress on some of these things. I find them interesting, but anyway. So this is the haber-bosch process. What basically happens, the short and skinny of it is that air has a high concentration of nitrogen in it, but it's unusable by plants. It needs to be put into the soil in a form like ammonium or nitrate or urea that can then be dissolved in the soil solution and then taken up by the plant. But in the air, it's not available to most plants, okay? But if you take air and natural gas or methane and you compress it in this manner right here, there's a compressor, and then you run it through a reactor when there's a catalyst in this reactor, and you're under immense heat and pressure along with natural gas, you can convert that N2 that's in the air into ammonia, which is NH3 found here. It's essentially, think of it like distilling alcohol. It's kind of like making moonshine, where you're distilling alcohol from a carbon source. In this case, you're essentially distilling nitrogen from atmospheric nitrogen. You're distilling it into a gaseous form, or under pressure, it'll remain as a liquid form in this anhydrous ammonia, which is 83% nitrogen. This is the first step. It basically, this coolant system is where the ammonia condenses that out of a gaseous form, condenses into a liquid, and then that first step is the first end product of the haber-bosch process. It's still not usable in turfgrass management as ammonia. It is usable in ag. So occasionally you'll see these sort of cylindrical white containers, trucks going down the highway, and let's say NH3 on it, let's say NH3 on it, and that's anhydrous ammonia, and that anhydrous ammonia can be knifed into the soil under agricultural production. It tends to be the least expensive way to do it, but in turfgrass we can't do that, right? So instead we'll take that anhydrous ammonia and we will react it with things like carbon dioxide or some other gas to form urea, which is a 4600. That's that's the highest percent nitrogen you can get from a granular form for the most part. And then from that step you have urea, and you can convert that down using conversions with other acids or other gases to form ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate and so forth. But it all comes from the haber-bosch process. Okay, with very, very few exceptions nowadays, there is occasionally some potassium nitrate that is occasionally mined, but not really today hardly at all anymore compared to the total usage of nitrogen. It's minuscule. And of course, there's natural organics, which is just a recycling sort of the nitrogen, which at some point was very likely coming from the haber-bosch process, at least today. So in other words, if you butchered a cow and you had remains left over, well, that cow was eating grain that was probably a result of the haber-bosch process. So the nitrogen, the protein, and the amino acids in that grain that then went into the cow that then wasn't used in meat was ground down in bones and everything else. It still came from the haber-bosch process at some point, even though it's natural organic. So a large component or a large portion of nitrogen in our turfgrass fertility, at one way or the other, is coming from the haber-bosch process. Okay. Didn't mean to go into that much, but it is what it is. Okay, so we have atmospheric nitrogen, which is not really useful at all. It's an N2. Then it goes into ammonia, which is 83% nitrogen. We convert it to urea. We just went all the way through this. The liquid or a solid, 4600. And then you can take this solid and form polymer-coated ureas and whatever else, sulfur-coated ureas and all sorts of different types of ureas once it's in a solid phase. And here's the biosolids. That's what I talked about. Biosolids are much less nitrogen and much more expensive. So this, in order of cost, the top of this chart is the least expensive, and as you go down this list, it becomes more and more expensive per pound of nitrogen. So the bottom of the list is the bottom of the percentage, and it's also the most expensive nitrogen sources at the bottom. Okay. Phosphorus is different. Phosphorus is essentially all phosphorus is mined from rock phosphate. This is a phosphorus mine in Florida. I think this is over in the Brandon area, Florida, if I recall correctly, and generally in the like southeast of Tampa area. And phosphorus is all over Florida. There's huge mines of it in Florida, and it's mined, and that phosphorus is then reacted with acids to form concentrated superphosphate, which is what we use, or monoammonium phosphate or diammonium phosphate. These are all raw materials that are a result of mined phosphate rock reacting with an acid. Potassium manufacturers, it's also mined. Most potassium, huge chunks of potassium at least, are mined from ancient deposits, usually from ancient seabeds, but it can be from a variety of different sources. But you can see some potassium mines here. This is a photo, credit to the Yara Corporation. This is one of their mines. I don't know. I want to say this is in Germany. I can't remember now where this mine is on the right, but I believe it's somewhere in Europe is where they're mining this from right now. Okay, so the general ordering process. This is going to become important. So I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page here. On the general ordering process. It doesn't mean this is necessarily the case the way that you do it. You might just walk into a store and buy it. Okay, that's fine, not a problem. But generally, when I'm talking about ordering, I'm talking about you have a relationship with the salesman. You go to the salesman, you say, I want this fertilizer. I need so many tons of this type of fertilizer. That's the type of ordering process that I'm talking about here, not just walking into a turf store and buying something off the rack. Although, if you that still fits this purpose, I suppose. But from here forward, if you're capable of buying 1 ton or more in your business, if you're a superintendent or a sport turf manager or whatever, Mason RC, welcome to the pro level. Thank you for your membership. If you're able to buy 1 ton or more, then all the rest of this information is going to be directly relevant to your world. If you're ordering or you're buying bag quantities, like 5 bags or 10 bags at a time, this the rest of this evening you might not find it as relevant for your specific needs, because I'm going to be talking about how to adjust the ordering process into your favor. And that requires the ability to generally be able to order more than a ton, because you're going to create the fertilizer yourself, and you're going to have the salesman order a fertilizer specific for you. And that normally requires at least a 1 ton minimum in order to do that. So if you can't do that, the next best thing would be to understand this process and then buy a SKU number or a product off the shelf that best fits this, process. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know. Okay, the general ordering process. Generally, you tell the salesman what you want. The salesman formulates the fertilizer. The order is sent to the blending plant. The plant generates a batch sheet. Then the operator blends the fertilizer, and the fertilizer is shipped to you. That's generally what happens. So you would tell a salesman, I want a 15-5-15, or I want a 15-0-15, or I need a 20-0-10 with 50% slow release. And those are that sort of language or ordering is very common. The salesman will then formulate it. Generally, it's the salesman that formulates the fertilizer. So he has a software program on the computer, or perhaps the software program's in the office, but they'll send the order in, and then what you told the salesman has to be formulated into a fertilizer. So if you went in and said, hey, I want a chocolate cake, he'd say, okay. And then he has to actually order the sugar, order the flour, the right percentages of chocolate, and yet he has to create the cake using the right amount and the right type of ingredients. And then he orders the cake. Okay, then the manufacturer will blend the cake. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Harper Explorer says the minimum for you all is 2 pallets, 2 tons of 2100, 100. Yeah, so you're good to go, and this would be relevant to you'd be able to follow this process, Harper. So you would tell the salesman you want this and this and this, and they would order. The salesman sends the order in. The order is sent to the blending plant. That's just an automatic thing. Then when it gets to the blending plant, what happens is the order is converted from a 15-5-15 with 50% sulfur-coated urea and 50% ammonium sulfate and 100% potassium sulfate. It's converted from that into pounds of urea or pounds of ammonium sulfate, pounds of sulfur-coated urea, pounds of so on forth, so forth. Okay, that's the batch sheet. That batch sheet is going to be immensely important when it comes to adjusting, if you so choose, adjusting your mindset to function as somebody who wants to build your house exactly like you want it, rather than just buying a prefab house. Prefab houses are easy, nothing wrong with them. Buy it, you know exactly what you're going to get. But you can't necessarily fidget with everything. You can't adjust it to your specific needs. You may be on soils, for example, that are very, very low in pH, and you want to increase the pH, or you may be on a high pH and you want to reduce the pH. And you're not going to necessarily be able to do that with a set fertilizer. You might, I'm using the house analogy and converting it to fertilizer, but if you buy the tools and you have the knowledge to build your house, you can build it however you want to build it. You can build however big a bathroom you want. You can build the biggest deck you ever wanted, but you have to do it, and you have to have the knowledge, and you have to have the tools. And that's what I'm going to give you all tonight, or start the process tonight if you don't already have it. How do you actually go about building your house, building your fertilizer? Okay, so that's this batch sheet is exact. We're going to spend a lot of time on this specific square. The plant generates the batch sheet. We're going to get back to this in just a second. And the operator, this is somebody in the plant who's on a skid steer, usually dumping tons of fertilizer on a scale and then sending it up the chute, and they bag it, and then fertilizer shipped to you. So this, okay, and this is on the next one. Okay, so this is the general process. Many salesmen are order takers. Okay, I was in sales for a long time, guys. I was in sales manager for a long time. A lot of them are order takers. We want to use this to our advantage. This was a quote that I heard when I was in sales, and it just, to this day, it never has left my mind. And it was one of my managers would tell me this: don't just sell them what they need, sell them what they'll pay for. What that means is, it doesn't matter whether what you sell them they actually need or not. That was the mentality, and is the mentality of many salesmen. I don't care whether what I'm selling you is actually needed by you or not. I'm going to sell you what you'll pay for, not necessarily what you'll need. And this quote obviously is just burned into my brain because it just never sat well with me. And I still use it to this day. Don't just sell them what they need. Sell them what they will pay for. So we're going to use this to our advantage. They will sell you most anything you ask for, regardless of its agronomic or economic efficiency. In fact, I was on the phone today with an old salesman friend of mine, and he reminded me of a quote I gave. I don't even remember it, honestly. He told me, he's like, "This is one of the funniest things you ever said." And I'm like, I honestly don't remember saying this, but it does sound like something I might say. And he's saying that, we occasionally knock this back and forth even today because we just giggle at it. And my point back then was, you need to let the customer know what is useful and what is not useful. I mean, let them know, hey, this is probably your most efficient blend. But if you want me to put peanut butter in your fertilizer, I'll do it. I'll charge you for it, and I'll sell you a bag full of fertilizer with some peanut butter. And if that's what you want, it's not going to be useful. But if you're dead set on doing that, I'll do it. And I really don't remember saying that, but it does sound like something I would probably say. And we laughed at it. I guess it was this week. I was on the phone with him, and it does sound like that. They'll sell you whatever you want. It doesn't mean it's useful. You're the one as the end user. Unfortunately, the salesman is not responsible for educating you. You're responsible for your own revenue and your own profit and your own choices and your own decisions. But they'll sell you Tic Tacs in a ton if you want it. It doesn't mean anything regarding whether or not it's agronomically efficient or useful at all. So if that's the case, which I'm convinced it is, the salesman will do that. We want to use that to our advantage. We want to use the knowledge that a salesman will sell you whatever you want. Let's use that to our advantage and hopefully result in a fertilizer that is the most efficient for you, because at the end of the day, the salesman is going to make basically the same margin on the fertilizer one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily matter to him. He's selling you whatever you want, okay, whatever you'll pay for. So we want to just make sure that the money that we're going to spend is going to be the most efficient we can, okay? Well, hang on a second. Let me read this. It says, Super TA says, that's why I called out 99% of the YouTubers and got blocked. Oh, okay. maybe that's... So yeah, it just happens a lot. Don't sell them what they need. Sell them what they pay for. Don't sell them just what they need. Sell them what they'll pay for. And I just never sit well with me. So we want to know. We want to go. Okay, you'll sell me whatever. Okay, this is what I want, but you need to know how to do it. General ordering process. So this is the ordering process we just talked about. Okay, you tell the salesman what you want. Salesman fertilizes the fertilizer. This is exactly what we just talked about. Okay, but now what we want to do is we want to short circuit this process to where you create the batch sheet, okay? You create this batch sheet, and you don't tell the salesman, I want a 15-5-15. You don't tell them, I want a 50% slow release. You tell them, you hand them the batch sheet itself, and you say, I want this fertilizer. And they'll go, okay. I mean, you just cut out some work for them, but now you know exactly what you're ordering. You know exactly what's in the ton. And I'm going to show why that's important when we get to the formulation exercises at the end. You might be shocked at what's in the ton that you didn't realize. Okay, so we're going to work on this tonight, this batch sheet right here. So we're not going to have the salesman formulate the fertilizer. We're going to cross that out. He's going to send the order to the plant, but it's going to be a batch sheet that he orders. Oh, how do I do a green thing? Let me back up. I can't do that. This is what we're going to generate the batch sheet. So he's going to send the order in as a batch sheet rather than an order form. Okay. It's not that complicated, and it saves you a ton of money. The batch sheet is the fertilizer recipe. You're giving them the recipe of exactly how you want the cake made. You're not telling them, I want a chocolate cake. You're telling them, I want this many ounces of chocolate, this many cups of flour, this many cups of milk. I want this much, I want exactly like this. That's what I want. And the salesman is going to go, sure, okay. What do they care? They're going to go, yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's not like, it's not going to bother them. They're going to sell you the fertilizer one way or the other. Okay? No state law. This is important. At least I'm going to go back 5 years. It might have changed in 5 years. A lot changes in 5 years. No state law requires a fertilizer distributor to list all raw materials on a fertilizer label. This results in raw materials such as filler being added without your knowledge. There is no state law that says everything in that bag of fertilizer has to show up as an ingredient. It'll have the guaranteed analysis. It'll have the percent slow release. It'll have things like the chlorine content. It'll have the derived from statement. But there's a big black box that no distributor or blender has to put anything in. And those are things like overformulated nutrients, and those are things like filler. There's all sorts of stuff that can go in that box. So my point is that it's very likely that if you're watching this or listening to this, you are buying materials, and there's materials in your fertilizer that you don't know are in there, that you're paying for, that are not providing an agronomic benefit. Okay? So let's get into that. Therefore, there it is at the end. Therefore, you are unknowingly paying for fertilizer components that provide little to no value. And I'm going to show you exact numbers on this, exactly how this is. And oftentimes, I'll be frank, oftentimes, you can't avoid it. It's possible to avoid it. I'm going to show you exactly how to avoid it at the very, very end, probably 2 more episodes from now. I'm going to show you exactly how to avoid every waste. But under normal conditions, unless you're neurodiverse like me, you're going to go, that's good enough. Just run with it. And that's fine. Okay. But there is a way to blend it with no waste. At least at the bare minimum, you're going to be able to blend it with very, very little waste after tonight. Now, if I asked you, what do you think the number one raw material is, and you didn't listen to the last episode or 2 episodes ago, you might go urea or it might go polymer-coated urea. Well, the number one raw material used in granular fertilizers and turfgrass, at least by the company I used to work for, is filler. There's not even a close second. It's not urea. It's not potassium chloride. It's not potassium sulfate. It's filler. And the reason for that is it's kind of analogous to the same reason why kickers in the NFL are always the highest point scorers. It's not the running back who's scoring 6 points. It's not the quarterback who's throwing 6 points for a touchdown. It's always the kickers that have the highest points scored in the NFL, because for every touchdown they're getting 1 point for the extra point. If they don't get a touchdown, they get 3 points for the field goal. They're always scoring a little bit, the kickers, every game. Whereas a quarterback might not throw a touchdown every game, or a running back might not run a touchdown every game. But the kickers are always scoring a little bit. And it's the same thing with filler. There's always a little bit of filler in the ton, unless you know how to properly formulate it. And you can see here where I live in Kentucky, 15%. Now this is dry granular fertilizer on turf grass only in Kentucky. This was in 2000 and probably 16 or 17, so it might have changed since then. 15% of the tons that go out on turf grass is just wasted filler. Just waste. And I know people come and say, oh, well, filler, you can reduce dust, and filler, you can reduce caking and anti-this and anti-that. Hogwash. Believe me, the fertilizer can be blended just fine without any dust, without any caking, without any cementing up. They can be blended just fine if you know how to do it correctly without any filler, and you don't have to pay, you don't have to waste any money on that. But look up the highest one: Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. 21%, even in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, 21% of those tons is filler. So every 5 tons of fertilizer you buy, 1 entire ton is complete wasted filler. And Eric Ligness, the number one filler, it will depend, but the number one filler is almost always locally sourced limestone. Almost always. It can be sand, it can be corn husks, it can be shingle scrapings, it can be any leftover material that just takes up bulk in the ton. Generally speaking, it's limestone for a couple of reasons, because it's usually locally available and it's the least expensive source of filler. So filler can range anywhere between, $90 to $120 a ton on the low end. And then they can go up from there. Like sometimes people do use gypsum for filler, and of course you're going to be up in the hundreds of dollars a ton for gypsum. But just for limestone filler, you're looking at, $80, $90 a ton to as much as $100, $120 a ton. It's just locally available, low shipping costs, and takes up room in the ton. Okay, so think about like that. Every 5 tons, 1 ton is just wasted filler that you paid $30 a bag for. $30 a bag for 40, 50-pound bags. It's just waste. It's insanity. It's nuts. But the thing is, I don't think people realize this. I don't think the general turfgrass industry and purchasers even realize that there's this much waste in fertilizer. And you go, well, I get 1 or 2%. 1 or 2%, I get it. You can't avoid that. Like I said, the kickers are going to get those 1 or 2 points all the time. That's fine. 20% is absurd. That's just ridiculous. Anything greater than maybe 4 or 5% is just an unwise or uneducated blender or salesman or customer, whatever the case is, where they just don't know how to formulate it correctly. Because if I asked you, would you buy 1 bag of filler for $30? And you'd say, well, what does it do? Well, nothing. It's just filler. Well, no one would do that. I mean, no person, I should say, nobody who's responsible for the profitability of the company would do that. I mean, if your name's on the note at the bank, I doubt you're going to be wasting money on useless $30 bags of filler. But you just don't realize it because it's diluted down in the fertilizer, and you don't see it because it's blended in. I think that's why. Could be wrong. You all can tell me. So why is this important? When you can order using a batch sheet rather than only a fertilizer analysis, you will control all the contents of the fertilizer. This will result in similar turf performance at a reduced cost or increased performance for the same cost. That's what we're shooting for, greater efficiency. Okay, learning how to formulate. So now we're going to start learning how to formulate, okay? I'm going to go through 1 or 2 exercises, and then I'm going to leave one on the screen. I'm going to step away for like 1 or 2 minutes and let you all, the people who choose to participate, work on it. And then you can put it in the chat or not. If you're embarrassed, you think you might get it wrong, don't put it in the chat. Just hold it on your paper, and I'll come back and I'll give you the answer, okay? Yeah, every 5th bag is gravel, basically. You're right. That's another type of filler, I guess. Okay, so learning how to formulate. What is formulation? Formulation is the process of blending raw materials together, resulting in a finished blended fertilizer. So you might have diammonium phosphate, you might have urea, you might have potassium chloride, and you're going to blend it all together and put it in a bag and call it an 10-10-10 or whatever analysis you come up with, okay? Here's an example of a blending facility where you have ammonium nitrate over here. You'll see the names on these bins. What you're looking at on the screen are bins of fertilizer that are filled up from usually rail trucks or from rail cars or from trucks, and they're usually filled overhead conveyor system. That's what this one looks like it has. And these are bins. Here's an ammonium nitrate bin. Here's a filler bin. Here is another ammonium nitrate bin. You can see the names. Here's some K-Mag. Here's some granular SOP, sulfate of potash. I can't see the name of the next bin. And here, this little blurred thing here, this is a skid steer. And they just drive through here and dig up the fertilizer in a skid steer, and there's a scale usually over here, and they'll dump it in a scale, and then they'll put it in a blender. But it just comes in these, they're just big bins, where they can literally drive it. Each bin is like the size of a small house, and they'll drive it in and get the fertilizer they need, dump it in a scale, and put it in, just like you'd make a cake. That's all it is. Okay, formulation methods. So there's 2 ways to formulate. Essentially, there's 2 ways to formulate. One is you end with the analysis. When you end with the fertilizer analysis, that's a bit advanced. Okay, we can get to that at some point if you want to, but we're not going to do a formulation where you end with the analysis tonight. We're going to do a formulation where you start with the analysis, and we're going to formulate from that point forward. Formulation. Okay, this is the first exercise, and I'm gonna do this one with you. I'm gonna do 2 with you, actually, I think, and I'm gonna do it step by step. And so now, if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, would be the time to get that out, and a calculator, and I'll walk through every single step with you here on these first couple ones, so you can see the process. So we're gonna create a 10-10-10 fertilizer using urea, concentrated superphosphate, and potassium chloride. Okay, we're gonna create this. And we're going to create the batch sheet. Okay, that's the goal. and formulation from this point in the next couple episodes. And on Monday is going to be the members only episode. So if you want to get in on that and watch it live, you need to be a member, because I'm going to go over advanced formulation on Monday morning with the members at 10 a.m. is when I do that. Create a 10-10-10 using urea, concentrated superphosphate, and potassium chloride. We always blend on a 1 ton basis. Everything is done on a 1 ton basis. The first step is we need to convert the analysis to pounds. The analysis is a 10-10-10. We need to convert that into pounds of N, P2O5, and K2O. So 1 unit equals 1% of a ton, or 20 pounds. So this fertilizer analysis, a 10-10-10, is said to have 10 units of nitrogen. Okay, so a 10-10-10 contains 10 units of nitrogen. You take that 10, you simply multiply it by 20, and you come up with 200 pounds of nitrogen. So a 10-10-10 is going to have 200 pounds of nitrogen in it. This week, next week, and last week. It's always going to have 200 pounds of nitrogen in it, a 10-10-10. Okay? It's always going to have 200 pounds. 10 units of P2O5. 10 times 20 is 200 pounds of P2O5. 10 units of K2O. 10 times 20 is 200 pounds of K2O. So a 10-10-10 has 200 pounds of nitrogen, 200 pounds of P2O5, and 200 pounds of K2O. That's the first step. You have to do this with all the next problems or formulation questions we're going to have. You have to start off like this. Okay? So now that we know the pounds of the actual elements that we need in P2O5 and K2O, we know the pounds we need. Now we need to go to the next step. And the next step is you divide the pounds by the percent of nitrogen, P2O5, this should say P2O5 or K2O, in the raw material. In this case, we will use urea, concentrated superphosphate, and potassium chloride. So we already got the pounds. We're going to divide it by the percentage. Now, this is where you need to know the percentage of nitrogen in urea. Now, if you remember, I went over this last week. But if you don't know it, just type in Google, what's the percent of nitrogen in urea? It's always going to be 4600. What's the percent of phosphorus in concentrated superphosphate? Or P2O5 in concentrated superphosphate? It's going to say 0.460. What's the percent of K2O and KCl? It's going to say 0.060. Okay? But you need to know that. So 200 pounds of nitrogen, divide that by the percent of nitrogen, which is 0.46, and you're going to come up with 434 pounds of urea. Okay? So 200 pounds of nitrogen divided by the percent of nitrogen that's actually in the raw material. In this case, we're using urea. And you need 434 pounds of urea. 200 pounds of P2O5. In this case, it's just coincidental that it's also, concentrated superphosphate is also 46% P2O5. This is just coincidental that it happens to also be 46% nitrogen in urea and 46% P2O5 and potassium, or concentrated superphosphate. So it's 434 pounds of concentrated superphosphate. 200 pounds of K2O. Now, KCl is 60% K2O. So we're divided by 0.06, and you're going to come up with 333 pounds of KCl. This is the second step in formulation. All right? If there's any questions, be sure to put it in the chat, because this is going to become, unfortunately, much more complicated. So we need to understand this. If you don't understand it, believe me, you're not the first. I remember the first time I was trying to do formulation on the computer. I had a computer that was doing it automatically. And I was like, man, this isn't making sense. This isn't making sense. And I had to call in my colleague who had been with the company for 6-7 years. I was like, can you help me understand this? And I was walking through here, and he's like, oh, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. So don't feel bad if you don't get it. I didn't get it either. And it's not going to get any easier than this. It's going to get much more complicated. Okay. So step number 3, you sum the total pounds of fertilizer and add filler to bring the total to 2,000 pounds. It all has to add up to 2,000 pounds. So you have 434 pounds of urea, 434 pounds of concentrated superphosphate, 333 pounds of KCl. You're going to come up with 1,201 pounds of raw material. Now, the next thing is to add filler. 2,000 pounds, you subtract out the fertilizer, which is 1,201 pounds of raw material, and you come up with 799 pounds of filler, 800 pounds of filler. So if you make a 10-10-10 with urea, concentrated superphosphate, and potassium chloride, I don't care who you buy it from, it's always going to have 800 pounds of filler. Okay? So if that's the case, I'm not saying all 1010s have this. I mean, not all 1010s use these materials. Okay? But if you use these materials, then if you bought 10 tons of a 10-10-10 with these raw materials, 4 tons of those 10 tons is just wasted filler. Now think about it. 4 tons, which is 160 50-pound bags that you bought at, say, $20 a bag, whatever, is just complete waste. It's just total waste. And you didn't know it. Or you might not know. I'm assuming you don't know. Maybe you did know it. Okay? But that's how serious this inefficiency is. Okay? So, yeah, Chuck Benzing, when you say add 20% raw ingredients, we're going to get to that point. Okay? There's a couple, I think what you're asking, Chuck, is can you just add in more fertilizer instead of adding in the filler? The answer is yes, you can do that. There's a couple different ways we're going to work through this problem such that we minimize the filler, and that's one of them. Okay. You can add in more fertilizer into the ton. Your analysis is going to go up and up and up and up. It's not going to be a 10-10-10. It's going to be whatever it ends up being. It's 18-18-18 or 20-20, whatever the number is. But you can overformulate. But I'm going to show you a different way today. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but that's one way to do it, Chuck, yes. Okay. Now, so we're dealing with 800 pounds of filler in a 10-10-10 made with these raw materials. So for a 10-10-10 using these raw materials, the batch sheet is 434 pounds of urea, 434 pounds of concentrated superphosphate, 333 pounds of KCl, and 799 pounds of filler. That's 2,000 pounds of a 10-10-10. So, I don't know, but I suspect that if you were buying this fertilizer and you were buying it using a batch sheet, you would go, well, wait a second. 800 pounds of filler? Can't I put something else in the ton rather than filler? The answer is yes. You can reformulate this in a way that is much more efficient. It's going to be much less expensive per acre, much more expensive per bag or per ton, but per acre it's going to be much less expensive. Per pound of nitrogen, much less expensive. Okay? But we need to know how to do it. That's what we're here doing tonight. So let's go to the next one. Oh, why is this important? Okay, why is it important? If you bought a ton of 10-10-10 derived from urea, concentrated superphosphate, and potassium chloride for $800, 16 of those 40 bags were filler, and you paid $20 a bag. So that's another example of how much waste there actually is. 20 16-pound bags out of every 40. Okay? To put it another way, 40% of that $800 ton was waste and could have been avoided. And I've been doing this a long time. Don't let anybody else tell you different. It can be avoided, I'm telling you. It can be formulated. It can be blended in a way that you can still provide the same fertilizer nutrients to the whatever plant you're growing. You can do it with the same rate or the same amount of fertilizer. You have to change your spread rate. You can do it with the same nutrient applicant. You can apply the same amount of nutrients, and you can avoid all the filler. It can be done. Okay. The spread rates change. I know there's going to be limitations at some point when you get down so low. There's going to be logistical changes that might have to occur. All that's true, but it can be done if you're so willing to become more efficient at your program. Okay. Formulation. Let's do the next one. Now we're going to introduce a new variable. We're going to introduce percent slow-release nitrogen. So now what I want you to do is formulate a 15-0-15 using ammonium sulfate with 50% of the nitrogen coming from sulfur-coated urea and all the potassium coming from potassium sulfate. This is more realistic in the world of turfgrass, a 15-0-15, something like this, okay? So let's do this one. Whoops. Oh, okay. Oops. Okay, hang on. Okay, convert the analysis, 15-0-15 to pounds, just like we did the last one. 15 units in times 20, 300 pounds in. 15 units times K2O, or 15 units of K2O, 15 times 20, 300 pounds of K2O. When you want percent slow-release nitrogen, you have to multiply the pounds of the nitrogen that we just determined we needed by the percent slow-release nitrogen desired. So we already know we need 300 pounds of nitrogen because it's a 15, and we multiplied it by 20. Okay, and it's hang on, and it's 300 pounds of nitrogen that we need in a ton. So of those 300 pounds of nitrogen, we need 150 of them to be in a slow-release form, and the other 150 to be in a soluble or quick-release form. So you simply take the 300, multiply it by 50%, and you come up with 150 pounds of slow-in. So we need 150 pounds of soluble nitrogen, 150 pounds of slow-release nitrogen, and 300 pounds of potassium, or K2O, 300 pounds of K2O. So that's how you need to formulate it when you introduce a percentage of slow-release nitrogen on the tag. So that's very, very common. So you might say, I need 30% slow release, or 50% slow release, or 80% slow release. This, you would do it all the same way. You would just use those percentages rather than 50% slow. Okay. So if you're going back to your shop tomorrow morning and you're wondering if I can create a fertilizer that's 80% slow release using whatever, urea or ammonium sulfate, you just do the same thing. Yes, you can. Just you put in 80% slow rather than 50% slow, and you'll come up with whatever that is. If it was 80% slow, it'd be 300 times 0.8. It'd be 240 pounds of slow-release nitrogen rather than 150 pounds, okay? Just make those adjustments to suit it to your needs. Okay, then you divide the pounds by the percent of nitrogen and potassium in the raw material, just like we did before. So 150 pounds of nitrogen divided by 0.21 for ammonium sulfate. Now remember, you have to know what the percentage raw nitrogen is in the raw material. You have to know that. I'm not giving it to you. Okay, and the salesman would, I guess, if you asked him, what's the percent, nitrogen diammonium phosphate, they'd tell you 18% or whatever. But if you don't know it, you're not going to be able to proceed. You have to know that. All right, so ammonium sulfate's 2100, so we take 150 pounds of nitrogen, we divide it by 0.21, and we come up with 714 pounds of ammonium sulfate. We take 150 pounds of slow-release nitrogen, and we divide it by 0.43, which is normally the percent of nitrogen in sulfur-coated urea. And some sulfur-coated ureas can be different analyses, but generally nowadays it's around 43%. And you come up with 348 pounds of sulfur-coated urea, and 300 pounds of K2O divided by 0.5, which is the percent K2O in potassium sulfate. And you come up with 600 pounds of sulfate of potash or potassium sulfate. Okay? Is everybody getting that, I hope? Okay. We sum the total pounds of fertilizer and add filler to bring it to a total of 1 ton, just like we did before. 714 pounds of ammonium sulfate, 348 pounds of sulfur-coated urea, and 600 pounds of sulfate of potash. We come up with 1,662 total pounds of actual plant food. We subtract that from 2,000 pounds, and we come up with 338 pounds of filler. So in every single 15-0-15 made with ammonium sulfate, with 50% of the nitrogen coming from sulfur-coated urea, and all the potassium coming from sulfate of potash, I don't care who you buy it from. It doesn't matter if you go to another continent. It's always going to have 338 pounds of filler in it, unless they do something funky with it and they alter the over-formulation or something like that. In other words, it doesn't matter what the distributor is. It's going to be the same exact thing, same exact cake. If that's what you're asking for, if those are the stipulations, And those are the derived from materials. It has to be that. It can't be any other formulation. Okay. All right. Now, what I'd like to do is, this is the last, so this is the batch sheet. So for 15015, using ammonium sulfate, 50% slow, sulfate of potash, this is the batch sheet right here. 714 pounds of ammonium sulfate, 348 pounds of sulfur-coated urea, 600 pounds of SOP, 338 pounds of filler. So if you handed that to your salesman first, he'd probably be shocked. he or she would probably like, where'd you get that from? Like, how'd you figure out how to do that? But he's also going to know that I'm dealing with somebody who knows what they're talking about with fertilizer. He knows exactly what he wants. Because I don't know anybody that orders from a batch sheet. I mean, it's very rare. I guess I should say that. It's very rare to order from as a batch sheet. Because now you know as the consumer that you're buying 338 pounds of filler. And if you know that and that's what you want, so be it. Like I said, if you want peanut butter, I'll put peanut butter in there. As long as you know it, and as a salesman, my conscience is clear that I've informed you that it's not going to be useful, and you want it, I mean, I'll sell it. And so should every other salesman sell it. I mean, I think for me, my conscience will always get the best of me, and I want to make sure that they know, hey, there's no chance this peanut butter is going to help you, but I'll put it in if that's what you want. And so if you know there's filler and you want it, and that's what you put in, then at least you know it. Whereas before, you probably didn't even know it was 338 pounds of filler. Okay? So, this is usually a presentation I give, so I have questions before the exercise on the screen here. But I'm gonna do one. I think there's two actually, and I think I do it to show the difference. The first exercise is very simple, but if you don't get it, don't worry about it. It's your first exercise doing it blind. And then all the second one is the exact same question, if I remember correctly. And all I do is change one nitrogen source for the other. And I want to use that as an example to drive home the point that just simply adjusting the derived from components in the fertilizer can greatly alter the value of the product. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to go to the next screen. I'm going to take my earbuds out, and I'm going to come back in 2 minutes. If you don't want to put it on the screen, if you don't want to type it in the chat, don't put it on chat, okay? But just keep it with you for a minute. Keep it on the piece of paper next to you. Follow the same steps. Take the analysis, convert it into pounds of nitrogen, pounds of K2O. Take those pounds, divide it by the percent of the element in the raw material that is being asked for. Add all those up. Subtract it from 2,000 pounds, add in the filler, and you're done. Okay? Here's the question. I hope this works out. I've never done it like this where we're live and on YouTube or Zoom or whatever. So let's see how it works. Okay, formulation exercise. The first one. See if you're comfortable. We can at least get closer, at least walk through the process. The answer format is going to be like this. It's going to be so many pounds of urea, so many pounds of SOP, and so many pounds of filler. So your answer format is going to be the batch sheet. Here we go. So formulate a ton of 16-4-8 using urea, concentrated superphosphate, and muriate of potash. The answer is on the very next slide. I'm going to step away just for 1 minute, and I'll come right back. Okay, hopefully a couple of you took the time to at least attempt it. And keep in mind, I don't think I got it when I first did it. I guess it was when would that have been? Whatever, 16, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, whenever it was, I don't even remember. Okay. Yeah, so before I go to the answer, yeah, Chuck, as I was saying, there should be music on hold. Yeah, I should have put some music on. Let me address a comment made by Gardener Earth Guy because he's absolutely correct on his comment. It says filler can be industrial waste, ground sheetrock, scrap iron, ground up, etc. It can be anything that takes up bulk in the ton, but provides no nutrient no nutrients to the ton. So it can be, like I said, it can be shingle scraps. I think I was in Birmingham, Alabama once. At the time, I was looking at various raw materials for the company. We were looking at shingle scrapings as a potential source of raw materials, because a lot of these blenders and formulators, they'll get contacted by other people who have waste product or byproducts left over they got to do something with. They got to get rid of it. And it can be used in fertilizer as just extra filler. Like I said, there's corn husk left over, all sorts of stuff that's left over that can be used as filler. So you're right. I don't know necessarily about industrial waste. That sort of has a negative connotation to it. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but ground up sheetrock, all sorts of stuff can be put in as filler. Particularly, that's really more for like ag grade sort of fertilizer. But for sure, in some fertilizers that go out in the turf world, filler can be essentially anything that takes up bulk, takes up space in the ton, and doesn't provide any nutritional value. Okay, so the answer is you take the 16, the 4, and the 8, you multiply them by 20, you come up with 320 pounds of nitrogen, 80 pounds of P2O5, 160 pounds of K2O. You divide them by the analysis of each raw material. Urea is 46%, concentrated superphosphate is 46%, and potassium chloride is 60%. You come up with 695 pounds of urea, 174 pounds of concentrated superphosphate, 266 pounds of KCl, and you have to add 865 pounds of filler to create the ton. It's always going to be that answer. Okay, it's always going to be that way. There's no way you can make a 1648 with those raw materials and those stipulations and have it be anything else. You're always going to have 860-something pounds of filler in it. Okay, and how many tons of 1648 have you guys seen or put out? It's a very common fertilizer. It's a 4:1:2 ratio of in P and K, and it's a very common fertilizer for landscapes in general. They may or may not have contained those exact raw materials, but it's a very common analysis. One more, and then we'll have a turf thought, and then we'll have a little bit of music. All right, now let's formulate the exact same fertilizer. Now remember this, the filler is 865 pounds of filler in this previous question, 865 pounds. Now let's do the exact same thing, 1648, using the same potassium source, the same phosphorus source, but instead of using urea, let's switch it and use ammonium sulfate. I'll be back in 1 minute. So I'm giving you guys an extra time. The music tonight is by a gentleman that unfortunately I was never able to see live. Really sucks. He's no longer with us, but he had one of the best voices ever. And this song is, I know it's on a movie track, obviously, I get that, but it's just a really good song. And I really wish I would have seen him when I was going concerts all the time, and I never did. So that's who's going to close us tonight, the music at the end. Okay, let's get the answer to the problem. 1648 using ammonium sulfate, concentrated superphosphate, and muriate of potash. Same exact part on the first part is exactly the same. 320 pounds of nitrogen, 80 pounds of phosphorus, 160 pounds of K2O, but this time you're dividing it by 0.21 with ammonium sulfate. The 46% is the same from concentrated superphosphate, and the 60% K2O is the same from KCl. But now look how much of the nitrogen raw material we use. We use 1,523 pounds of ammonium sulfate. Hang on a second. Yeah. 266 pounds of KCl and 174 pounds of concentrated superphosphate. And now look at the filler. Only 37 pounds of filler. So in this case, we've got the exact same fertilizer, but instead of using urea, we just switched it for ammonium sulfate, and we went from 800 and something pounds of filler down to 37. And where'd all that filler go? Well, it went into the form of sulfate and ammonium. So this is an acidifying product. This is much more acidifying than the 1648 with urea. So if you don't want to acidify your soil, then you wouldn't be using this product. But if you did want to acidify your soil, this would be the product of choice that you want to use, and you're providing sulfate, which is a more commonly deficient macronutrient. It's becoming more and more common to see that as deficient in your soils and in your plant. So all we did was just switch the nitrogen source, and we almost completely eliminated all of the filler waste. Okay. And that's it for tonight on that particular topic. Let me get this on the screen. So yeah, this for those of you who want to see the math, this is the math. I don't know if I had it on the screen there. And let me answer Mike Conroy's question. Okay, guys? Okay, so Mike Conroy's question is the filler weight where they add the money by including iron, etc. I'm not exactly sure if I understand your question completely. I will say that if I'm reading it correctly, are they adding something in and getting more profit out of it, or increasing the cost or the price they add the money by including iron? I would say no. I mean, the blender is like I said, the filler's like 37 pounds of filler in 2,000 pound ton. That's sort of expected. You're going to have a little bit here and there, unless you know how exactly blended, exactly precise. And that'll be the very, very, very last step we do a couple episodes from now. But if you don't, like, for example, I wouldn't even bother doing the math to get this blended exactly precise, because 37 pounds of filler, what do I care? Just do it, or over-formulate the nitrogen, give me a little extra nitrogen, over-formulate it, and that's fine too. You can do it that way. But generally, the blenders aren't going to make a lot of profit on filler. I mean, it's just scrap filler stuff. So I don't see that as, if I'm reading your question correctly, I don't see that as a means for them to sort of crowbar in some extra margin dollars or something. No, I would say no. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so for the members, what I would suggest you do is come on Monday morning with calculators and pencils and papers, because we're going to go over this again, and we're going to be continuing to build. This is as simple as it's ever going to get. It's going to get more and more complicated. Because we're going to be adding in multi-nutrient raw materials, where one raw material, such as diammonium phosphate, has both nitrogen and phosphate in it, right? Where, say, sulfomag has magnesium and, potassium in it, So there's some raw materials that have more than just one element in it, and we need to know how to formulate those fertilizers. And then on the next day, we're going to be formulating it in a way that, and I'm going to give you an equation. You can do it by fidgeting with the numbers, but the easiest way is just to see the equation. And all you have to do is put this in an Excel, put it in an Excel file, and you can just type the numbers in from that point forward, and it'll automatically spit out the exact amount of fertilizer to completely balance the fertilizer out such that there's no filler left at all. Okay, so that'll be probably next Thursday night. So and on that note, I think that'll be the shorter episode next Thursday night, and I'm going to try, because it keeps adding up, I'm going to try to get the comments and emails in, because otherwise I already have 21 pages of comments and emails. I somehow got to get out, and I've got to find some place to do that. So, and I want to actually answer Reed's question tonight, because this actually comes up quite frequently. And Reed's question is, would the limestone filler have any benefit for increasing pH? And the way I'm going to answer that is, it depends, but most likely not really. So let me explain this. Usually, locally sourced limestone filler, is not the same ag grade limestone that you would buy to apply as lime. It's usually more like a rocky material. It's just sort of like leftover waste from mining, whatever they happen to be mining at that location, and they have a big pile of limestone left over, okay? And they sieve out some of the larger pieces, and they're not going to sieve out the fines, but they'll just give you a certain portion of what's been sieved out as filler that you can buy as a distributor or a blender. So I would say usually I would not rely upon that. However, It's certainly not going to help keep your pH. If you want to keep your pH down, otherwise you don't want to increase your pH. It's not going to help, right? It's only, if anything, it's only going to result in a little bit of an increase in pH. But I wouldn't count on that because of the reason I mentioned. It's not really the same type of limestone. It's not an ag grade limestone, and in some cases it's just a little bit of limestone. Like I said, this one only had 37 pounds of filler in it. This last one, it's usually just a little bit, and you're putting that out in a ton, and that ton's only going to be spread over 3 or 4 acres. I mean, you're going out at 300 pounds per acre, right? So if 300 pounds per acre, you're going to be covering, whatever, almost 7 acres. With that 1 ton, and it's only 37 pounds in a ton. So I guess what I'm saying is the rate's probably not high enough, and the type of limestone it is probably not the limestone that you would expect to see a great increase in pH. But it's possible. I can't know every source of limestone filler that is locally sourced. I mean, it's possible that they might have a source of limestone filler nearby that actually does have like a calcium carbonate equivalent very high, and it's very soluble, and it could have an influence on soil pH. Okay, but I wouldn't count on that. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to let you go. Enjoy the turf thoughts and the music. I'll be back on Monday morning at 10 a.m. to continue a little bit more advanced formulation for turfgrass fertilizers. I really appreciate it. Great crowd tonight. Appreciate the questions and the comments in the chat, and I will see everybody back on Monday morning at 10 a.m. and then next Thursday night for the public. Thanks. Bye. And now, Turf Thoughts by Ken Corley. If you have ever referred to yourself as Doc, you're probably not one.